Welcome to Copilot Podcasts. More than one-third of adults in the United States are not getting enough sleep, and the CDC has the numbers to prove it. Meanwhile, the thing most of us do right before closing our eyes is scroll, stream, or tap on the very devices that are wrecking our rest. Today, we're breaking down Joe Barnabas' book, Better Sleep, Practical Tips for All Ages, Technology in the Context of Sleep. By the end of this episode, you'll understand exactly how technology is defined in the sleep conversation, why the same advice doesn't work for a toddler and a 60-year-old, and what the latest science says about whether your sleep tracker is helping or hurting. Joining me to dig into all of this is someone who has gone deep on the research. Let's get into it. So, first things first, who is Joe Barnabas and what made this book worth our time?
So Barnabas is pretty upfront about where this book comes from. In the introduction, he describes himself as a lifelong light sleeper, someone who goes to bed early but can't fall asleep, or goes to bed late and wakes up in the early hours. And that chronic lack of sleep, he says, affected his overall well-being and quality of life. So he started reading articles, books, research on sleeplessness and sleep disorders, and that research eventually became this book. So it's not written from an ivory tower, it's someone who actually lived the problem.
Exactly. And that grounding matters because the book doesn't pretend there's one universal fix. It's structured in two sections. Section A is about technology in the context of sleep, and Section B is about sleep hygiene broken down by age group. That two-part structure is actually pretty deliberate and smart.
Okay, let's start with Section A then. When Barnabas talks about technology in the context of sleep, what does he actually mean by technology? Because I feel like most people hear that and immediately think phones and laptops.
Right, and that's where the book does something interesting. Barnabas defines technology in relation to sleep as, and this is his framing, any aid, device, or system designed to facilitate or enhance human activities, including those related to sleep. So it's not just the villain. A white noise machine is technology. A sleep tracker is technology. A blackout curtain system could be technology. He's deliberately keeping the definition wide.
Oh, that's actually a really different framing than I expected. So technology isn't automatically the enemy in this book.
Not at all. And that's what makes it more nuanced than a lot of popular sleep content. The book reflects on how excessive use of screen time can alter your sleep-wake cycle. That's the concern. But it also acknowledges that some technology implementations can help. It's about context and use, not a blanket condemnation.
That's a much more honest take. Okay, so let's talk about Section B, the age group breakdown. Why does Barnabas organize it that way?
Because sleep needs genuinely change across your life, and the same advice doesn't translate. The book covers 6 groups: infants and toddlers from 0 to 2 years, preschoolers and school-aged children from 3 to 12, teenagers from 13 to 19, young adults from 20 to 39, middle-aged adults from 40 to 64, and older adults 65 and up.
And the CDC actually backs that up with specific numbers, right?
Completely. According to the CDC, a newborn needs 14 to 17 hours of sleep a day. A school-aged child needs 9 to 12 hours. Teenagers need 8 to 10, and adults 18 to 60 need at least 7 hours. So the range is enormous, and what disrupts sleep at each stage is also different. A teenager's relationship with their phone at night is a completely different problem than an older adult's sleep fragmentation.
That's such a good point. We tend to talk about sleep as if it's one universal experience, but it really isn't.
And Harvard Health actually reinforces this. They note that the amount of sleep we need varies by age and can be affected by each individual's unique health circumstances. So Barnabas's decision to break it down by life stage isn't just organizational, it's scientifically grounded.
Okay, so we've got the structure of the book. Let's get into the meat of it, the actual science behind why screens mess with sleep. Because I feel like everyone knows the headline, but not many people know what's actually happening.
So the headline is "Blue light disrupts melatonin production." And that's true, but it's also incomplete. A 2024 National Sleep Foundation consensus statement is really useful here. They convened a 16-person multidisciplinary expert panel, reviewed over 2,000 articles, narrowed it down to 522 relevant empirical studies, and ultimately reached consensus on 5 key statements.
Wait, 2,000 articles just to study screens and sleep?
2,209 to be exact. And what they concluded was that screen use in general impairs sleep health among children and adolescents, and that the content of screen use before sleep specifically impairs sleep health in that age group. They also found that behavioral strategies and interventions can reduce those negative effects.
So it's not just the light, it's also what you're watching or doing on the screen.
Exactly. And this is where it gets more nuanced than the standard advice. According to Psychology Today, writing from an insomnia specialist's perspective, not all screens should be treated equally. Research by Khan et al. In 2023 found that active screen use, like scrolling your phone, had a larger negative impact on sleep disturbances than passive screen use, like watching television.
Huh. So watching something on TV before bed might actually be less disruptive than doom scrolling Instagram. That feels counterintuitive.
It does, right? And there's even more complexity around blue light specifically. A study published in Sleep Medicine compared people reading a physical book for 2 hours before bed versus people reading from a brightly lit tablet, and they found no differences in sleep patterns between the two groups.
Wait, seriously? So the blue light thing might be overstated?
Not overstated exactly, the insomnia specialist writing in Psychology Today is careful to say blue light does impact melatonin production, but some studies reveal inconsistencies. The point is that blocking blue light alone isn't enough. The content, the engagement level, the mental stimulation, all of that matters too.
So the just put on blue light glasses and you're fine crowd might be missing the bigger picture.
That's exactly the argument. And there's a really compelling piece of evidence for that.
A randomized controlled trial published in 2025 showed that reducing mobile phone use by 2 hours per day for 3 weeks not only improved mental health, but also enhanced sleep quality. It wasn't about filtering the light, it was about reducing the engagement itself. 2 hours a day for 3 weeks. That's actually a pretty achievable experiment for most people.
It is. And it connects directly to what Barnabas is arguing in the book, that sleep hygiene is about habits and practices, not just one trick. The CDC's own recommendations include turning off electronic devices at least 30 minutes before bedtime, keeping a consistent sleep schedule, and keeping the bedroom quiet and cool. It's a system, not a single switch.
Okay, but here's where I want to push back a little, because we've been talking about technology as the problem. But Barnabas's own definition of technology includes sleep aids. So what about the flip side, technology that's actually supposed to help you sleep better?
Great question, and this is where the conversation gets really interesting. The National Sleep Foundation published a position statement in 2026, shaped in part by Dr. Azizi Seixas from the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine, that concluded science-backed consumer sleep technologies can play a positive role in improving sleep health, particularly by increasing awareness and encouraging healthier behaviors.
So the NSF is actually endorsing sleep trackers and apps?
With a very important caveat. Dr. Seixas said, and this is a great quote, "Sleep technology has made sleep visible, and visibility is the first step to better health and sleep health." But the statement also explicitly noted that many consumer tools are not designed or validated for clinical decision-making. So they can help you build awareness, but they're not a substitute for actual medical care.
That's a really important distinction. Your Fitbit can tell you something's off, but it can't diagnose sleep apnea.
Exactly. And a 2025 review published in the journal Sensors looked at 21 smartphone apps, 16 smartwatches, and 9 smart mattresses. Their conclusion was that wearables provide the best balance of accuracy, affordability, and usability for general users. Smartphone apps are cost-effective but offer lower accuracy, more appropriate for casual tracking than clinical use. And smart mattresses, while comfortable and passive, are costlier and have limited clinical validation.
So there's a whole spectrum of how useful these tools actually are.
A wide spectrum. And here's where it gets a bit ironic. The very apps designed to help you sleep can sometimes make things worse. A 2026 study from the University of Bergen in Norway, published in Frontiers in Psychology, surveyed over 1,000 adults about their use of sleep apps. They found that 46% of participants reported current or previous use of sleep apps.
Nearly half. That's a lot of people.
And here's the twist. The study found that younger individuals, those under 50, scored highest on both positive and negative perceived effects of sleep apps. So they got more benefit, but they also experienced more anxiety or disruption from the feedback. The youngest users were the most reactive to what the app told them.
So if your app tells you that you only got 4 hours of deep sleep, a younger person is more likely to spiral about that than an older person.
That's essentially what the data suggests. And the study also found that people with insomnia showed significantly higher scores on negative effects compared to those without insomnia. So the people who most want help from these apps might also be the most vulnerable to being stressed out by them.
That's a really uncomfortable irony. The tool you reach for when you're already struggling might be adding to the struggle.
It is. And it's why Barnabas's framing, that technology is neither purely good nor purely bad, but depends on how it's used, holds up really well against the current research. The book was published in May 2024, and the science that's come out since then keeps reinforcing that nuanced view.
Let's talk about the sleep hygiene section of the book for a second, because I think that's where a lot of the practical value lives. What does Barnabas actually recommend?
The book frames sleep hygiene as various practices and habits that promote optimal sleep quality and quantity, tailored to each age group. And that tailoring is key. What works for a toddler, consistent nap schedules, limited screen exposure, is completely different from what works for a middle-aged adult dealing with work stress and a phone on the nightstand.
And Harvard Health actually defines sleep hygiene in a way that lines up with that, right?
Very closely. Harvard Health describes sleep hygiene as making your sleeping environment comfortable and conducive to uninterrupted sleep, keeping a consistent sleep schedule of 7 to 9 hours per night for most adults, following a bedtime routine that helps you fall asleep, and establishing daytime habits that optimize restful sleep at night. It's a whole ecosystem, not just one behavior.
And the CDC adds to that consistent wake times, cool bedroom, no big meals or alcohol before bed, cutting caffeine in the afternoon.
Right. And what's interesting is that the National Sleep Foundation's 2023 consensus statement, referenced by Harvard Health, actually updated one piece of conventional wisdom. The old advice was always, keep the same sleep schedule 7 days a week, no exceptions. But the NSF now says that after a week of insufficient sleep, it may actually be beneficial to get some catch-up sleep on weekends.
Oh, so the you can't catch up on sleep thing might not be entirely true?
At least not in the absolute way it's often stated. The science is evolving. And that's actually a good example of why a book like Barnabas's is valuable. It synthesizes a lot of this research into something accessible, even if the research itself keeps moving.
Let me ask you something that I think a lot of listeners are probably wondering. The book covers 6 age groups. Is there one group where the technology-sleep relationship is most urgent or most alarming?
Based on the research, teenagers are the most concerning. The National Sleep Foundation consensus statement was very clear that screen use in general impairs sleep health among children and adolescents. And the data on screen time is striking. According to that same statement, teens report using screen-based media for an average of 8.5 hours per day. 8.5 hours.
That's more than a full workday of screen time.
And a significant chunk of that is happening in the evening hours right before sleep. Meanwhile, the CDC says teenagers need 8 to 10 hours of sleep a night. So you've got a population that needs a lot of sleep, getting a lot of screen exposure right when they should be winding down. That's a real collision.
And the content matters too, not just the time.
That's one of the key findings from the NSF consensus. The content of screen use before sleep specifically impairs sleep health in children and adolescents. So it's not just that they're on a screen, it's that they're watching stimulating, emotionally engaging content right before they're supposed to sleep. That's a very different wind down than reading a book.
Okay, I want to bring in the AI angle here because it came up in the research and I think it's something a lot of people haven't thought about. How does generative AI fit into this conversation?
So this is a newer wrinkle. The Psychology Today piece from an insomnia specialist makes the point that using generative AI close to bedtime can make it much harder to choose sleep. And when you think about it, that makes sense. You're in a back and forth conversation, you're problem solving, you're mentally engaged. It's the opposite of winding down.
So the just one more question to the chatbot loop is basically the new just one more episode problem.
That's a really apt comparison. And it's something Barnabas's book couldn't have fully anticipated when it was written in 2024. But the framework he sets up, that technology's impact on sleep depends on how it's used and what it's doing to your brain state, applies perfectly to AI tools as well.
So the book's framework is actually more durable than any specific technology it mentions.
That's a good way to put it. The specific devices will change. We'll have new gadgets, new apps, new AI tools. But the underlying question of how any given technology affects your sleep-wake cycle and your mental state before bed stays constant.
Let's talk about the older adult group for a second, because I feel like they get left out of this conversation a lot. The book goes up to 65 plus. What does the research say about technology and sleep for that age group?
The University of Bergen study is actually interesting here. They found that sleep app usage was more prevalent among younger individuals under 50, and that older adults were less reactive to the feedback from sleep apps, both in terms of positive and negative effects. So older adults may be less likely to use these tools and also less likely to be destabilized by them.
Which is kind of reassuring, actually.
In one sense. But the CDC notes that adults 65 and older need 7 to 8 hours of sleep, and sleep disorders are common across all age groups: insomnia, restless leg syndrome, sleep apnea, narcolepsy. So the need for good sleep hygiene doesn't go away with age, it just looks different.
And the book addresses that, different practices for different life stages.
That's the whole premise of Section B. And it's actually one of the book's strongest contributions. Most sleep content is written for a generic adult. Barnabas explicitly says that by implementing any or all of the listed mechanisms for the different age groups, individuals can improve their sleep hygiene practices and promote better sleep quality and overall well-being throughout life. That throughout life framing is deliberate.
Okay, so here's a question I want to sit with for a second. We've talked about technology as a disruptor and technology as a potential aid. Is there a version of this where technology actually solves the sleep problem it helped create?
The NSF position statement from 2026 suggests yes, with limits. Dr. Sakes's framing is that sleep technology has made sleep visible, and visibility is the first step to better health. So the idea is that a sleep tracker doesn't fix your sleep, but it can show you patterns you weren't aware of, which then motivates behavioral change.
So it's a mirror, not a cure.
That's a really clean way to put it. And the 2025 review from Yunzhe University in Taiwan reinforces that wearables give you the best balance of accuracy and usability, but the goal should be using that data to change behavior, not just to collect data. The data alone doesn't do anything.
Which is kind of the same thing Barnabas is saying about sleep hygiene in general. Knowing the practices isn't enough. You have to actually implement them.
Exactly. And that's where the book's practical orientation is its real value. It's not trying to be a research paper. It's trying to give people actionable steps they can actually use, organized by where they are in life.
So when you step back from everything we've covered today, the book's structure, the science on screens, the nuance around sleep tech, what does this all really come down to?
Here's what I keep coming back to. Barnabas wrote this book because he was a light sleeper who couldn't find one resource that addressed both the technology problem and the age-specific solution in the same place. And what the research confirms is that he was right to see those as connected. The CDC says more than 1/3 of adults aren't getting enough sleep. The NSF says screens are a significant driver of that for kids and teens. And the solution isn't to throw your phone in the ocean, it's to be intentional about how, when, and why you're using technology around sleep.
And the age group framing matters because a blanket rule, no screens after 9 p.m., means something completely different for a 7-year-old versus a 50-year-old. Completely different. And the research backs that up at every stage. Teenagers are in a particularly vulnerable spot given that they're averaging 8.5 hours of screen time a day while needing 8 to 10 hours of sleep. Young adults using sleep apps are getting real benefits but also real anxiety from the data. Older adults need consistent sleep hygiene even if they're less plugged in. There's no one-size-fits-all answer, and Barnabas doesn't pretend there is. And the technology as aid angle is genuinely hopeful. The NSF isn't saying throw away your sleep tracker, they're saying use it wisely, understand its limits, and let it inform behavior rather than replace clinical judgment.
Right. And that's a much more sustainable message than technology is ruining sleep, full stop. Because the reality is that technology is woven into every part of our lives now, including how we try to improve our health. The question is whether we're using it with intention or just letting it use us.
That's the line right there. Are you using technology, or is it using you, especially in those last hours before you close your eyes?
And the practical takeaway from Barnabas's book is that you don't have to answer that question perfectly, you just have to start asking it. Pick the sleep hygiene practices that fit your life stage. Be honest about how your screen habits are affecting your rest. And if you use a sleep app, treat it as a starting point for awareness, not a verdict on your health.
We started this episode with the fact that more than 1/3 of adults in the US aren't getting enough sleep. And here's the thing, that number isn't going to change because of one book or one podcast, but it might change one person at a time, one intentional bedtime routine at a time. Joe Barnabas wrote this book because he was tired of being tired. That's a pretty relatable starting point. And if you're listening to this right now, maybe on your phone, maybe in bed, well, you know what to do next. Thanks for being here on Copilot Podcasts. Sleep well.